Richard Haass is president of the Council on Foreign Relations. Richard, put this in perspective for us. What kind of message is the administration sending?
This is another signal to Iran of just how unhappy the administration is with their nuclear program, with their support for terrorism, with what they're doing in Iraq. And the administration is hoping that it puts pressure on Iran and perhaps galvanizes the rest of the world, or at least part of the rest of the world, to also join us.
The administration also says this is no prelude to war. So they're really walking a delicate line here, aren't they?
Right. If the administration looks too anxious to war, they'll lose the rest of the international community. Also, war would not be, shall we say, a cakewalk. Just the opposite. It would be extremely difficult to accomplish things, plus Iran would retaliate in a host of ways. Oil would rise to $200 a barrel.
So we're ratcheting up the rhetoric, but we're not really marching toward any kind of military action, in your view?
I think this is separate from that in the sense that I don't believe the administration has made up its mind. But yes, military action is a real possibility for this administration.
What is likely to be Iran's response?
Iran will ignore this. This will ratchet up the pain only slightly. These are unilateral sanctions, Katie. Unilateral sanctions rarely make a significant difference. History suggests it will not change Iranian behavior.
There have been sanctions against Iran in one form or another since 1979. Have they worked, or have they had an impact?
They've had an impact against Iran. Iran's economy is paying something of a price for these sanctions, but without significantly more international support, these sanctions just introduce more of a gesture than a real blow against Iran.
What do you mean by that?
It sends a signal, more of a political signal, rather than actually accomplishing a lot. This sort of sanction is not going to change any Iranian policy about Iraq, about terrorism, about its nuclear ambitions.
Secretary Rice said these sanctions are aimed against the Iranian government, not the Iranian people. But they won't suffer at all, and will they actually buy that?
It may have a slight impact on the standard of living in Iran. In turn, the people may question what the government's doing. But unless the United States makes it clear that we are prepared to offer Iran a reasonable, attractive deal, it's not enough just to have sticks. You've also got to have some carrots, some incentives. So what's missing from this policy is not only international support for the sanctions, but what's missing from this policy is any sign of an incentive for Iran. Why should the Iranian government change its policies? It's not clear that that's there.
What kind of incentives are you talking about?
Well, the United States could offer Iran a reduction in various kinds of economic sanctions if, for example, they change some of their nuclear policies. Plus, we could change what it is we're actually demanding of Iran in the nuclear game. Instead of saying, we won't talk to you until you give up all nuclear activity, we could say, we'll talk to you now, and let's discuss what sort of limits you might accept on your nuclear program. That would be a serious negotiation. So thus far, we have not been prepared to do that.
President Putin of Russia continues to use some tough rhetoric. Today he compared the U.S. to, quote, a madman with a razor blade in his hand.
Well, Putin, in part, is speaking to his own domestic audience. There's a lot of mileage to be made in anti-Americanism these days. But also, it's a signal. These are unilateral sanctions. Russia is not supporting them. This is not happening inside the UN Security Council. I think what we're beginning to see is a U.S. policy that's essentially sidestepping the UN and increasingly is either going to be unilateral or maybe only multilateral in the most limited sense.
What is Russia's role in all this? It seems as if Putin is cozying up with Ahmadinejad, as you saw recently, and stepping up his rhetoric against the U.S.
The Russians like being seen to push back against the United States. So I think what we're seeing from Mr. Putin is just that. He wants it to be seen domestically and internationally that he and Russia cannot be taken for granted. Plus, they don't want to see a war between the United States and Iran. They don't want to see the international economy totally disrupted.
What do you think will happen next between the United States and Iran?
I think what you're going to see is an attempt by the United States to get the UN Security Council to go along on some of these sanctions. Probably, though, the most important step is going to be what Iran says to the International Atomic Energy Agency. They have got to answer before the end of this year a series of questions, and that will tell the world whether Iran is prepared to any significant extent to compromise on its nuclear ambitions.
What is your guess?
I don't think there's going to be a lot of compromise. I think the Iranians are going to hang pretty tough, and they are going to see essentially whether the world is willing and able to put sanctions on that bite, whether the United States is prepared to put some incentives, something positive on the table, and they might want to see how loud the drumbeat gets about the possible use of military force. I don't think this crisis has yet come to a head, but it may well in simply a matter of months.